would like to invite our presenters, to all of our presenters, please coming back to turn on your video so everyone can see us. Charles, Natalie, Rasika. Hi, Pak Charles. So, Pak Charles, and
yes.
probably you can, from based on your experience, how ready are we? Most companies in the world, I'm not saying in Indonesia, because our audience in here came from many countries. How ready do you think we are to a pandemic? Because it seems like everyone's a little bit, say panicking. And probably we are ready with tsunami, we are ready with the earthquake, we are ready with the chaos and everything. But pandemic seems sometimes like new. Well, it is actually not, because we already have this in the past with the SARS and everything. So what do you think happened with the business continuity management or business continuity plan within the company in the world?
Thank you for the questions, Pak Fajar. I think you are correct that I also see the same phenomena where many of the organizations, not only in Indonesia but also in the world, not really that ready to face the pandemic, since that they might thought that the pandemic is not really relevant, to be included in the BCPs or into the key disaster scenario of the BCP. But of course, for companies in the countries who have already experienced same case, like Natalie mentioned earlier, the SARS or MERS. The company has already experienced the epidemic. So I think those organizations in those countries are more ready for the COVID-19 pandemic. And about what needs to be done by the BCM manager, of course, as a BCM practitioners or managers or leaders, so we need to revisit and evaluate our BCP and try to revise it, so to include the epidemic or pandemic situations, the infectious disease like we have right now with COVID-19. So that would be my questions. I hope it answered the question, your questions, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Charles, for the answer. It's quite thorough. I mean, we also have to be prepared for the second wave. There's a questions about the second wave. Because just yesterday I met with, I'm not met, it's a conversation, with a friend from Hong Kong. At first wave, they only have 100 people affected. And then they feel that they think, they thought they're safe. But then the second wave came and impacting into 500, 5 times bigger than the previous one. So it is going to be very likely to happen to everyone. So there's a question from Pak Troy Steve. The question is to all speakers. I saw Natalie over here. Natalie, are you here?
I think I'm back now. Can you hear me?
Okay. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, Natalie.
still waiting for Rasika. Are you here, Rasika? Okay, at least to both of you. Yeah, the questions from Troy Steve. Yeah, what company need to prepare the potential second wave coronavirus? Yeah, it's, especially in Indonesia maybe, but Natalie, probably your perspective more global. Yeah, to ensure their resilience. Yeah. Hi, Rasika.
Hi there.
Okay, good to join us. Okay, I just released the questions. Probably I'm just gonna repeat the questions once again from Pak Troy. Yeah, what company need to be prepared for potential second wave coronavirus? Yeah, particularly in Indonesia, but globally. Yeah, since Natalie from US and Rasika from Australia, probably we can talk in more global perspective. But probably we can start with Charles, since you are in Indonesia, and then we go to Natalie and Rasika.
Okay, thank you, Pak, for the opportunity. To me, if there is a second wave in Indonesia, then of course there will be a longer disruptions to our business. That's what will come for sure with the second wave. So what we need to do to have a better preparations. First, I believe that we need to evaluate the effectiveness of our current BCP, see what need to be improved, and quickly respond to increase the effectiveness of our BCP, because the period for us to self-isolated in its home or house will become longer than we thought. And the second one, I believe that we also need to assess our liquidity and also the financial condition, and quickly respond whenever we find any issue there. And we also need to communicate the situation and also the anticipations that the company needs to take whenever the second wave comes. We need to communicate to our employees and make them understand, because I believe some of the anticipation may not be favorable to the employees. And the last one is we need to assess what other risks that might come to the organizations. It might be to our supply chain or our production or anything. Then quickly respond. Try to make better preparations to handle.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Natalie, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think that the hope is that we're learning a lot right now in the initial outbreak, and learning what methods are most effective to try and contain the spread of the virus, what might be effective treatments, how we might be able to identify people who have immunity and are not able to be infected, and come up with more preventative measures to try and prevent a second wave from really occurring, or if it does occur, that it's something that really doesn't overwhelm us and shut us down like it has this time. So that's the hope. But in the event that, we do let up some of these recommendations or regulations that are trying to really contain coronavirus at this point in time, ensuring that we have management and response plans in place that are really specific to each business. And I really liked what you were saying, Charles, about evaluating the effectiveness of those and seeing what we can learn from this experience and carry that over to either a second wave or other similar occasions like this in the future, and see how we can be better prepared next time. But really just having an effective management and response plan in place in advance is really helpful.
Okay, Natalie, we are curious. Yeah, your country, America, has the biggest number. Yeah, while we thought that your country will be have the probably the least in the world. Yeah, but we are surprised actually to hear that your number is just like wow. It's
Yeah.
almost a million, isn't it? Today. But yeah, before we are going to the second wave, the first wave seems like, well, I must say that probably there's something is failing, something is not working, something is wrong. Could you probably share with us what is it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that definitely I think is an issue here in the U.S. and I think it also has affected other countries is that this is a really overwhelming issue and it's something that a lot of people haven't. Nobody has seen before, but a lot of people were really not prepared for. And I think that when faced with really tough, complicated issues like this, sometimes it leads to indecision. And people feeling like maybe they're not qualified to make a decision or they're not qualified to act on something. And in the case of a rapidly spreading, outbreak with a novel pathogen, you don't have time for indecision. You have to act really quickly and recognize that there's an issue and take action. And I think that inaction has led to really detrimental effects in a lot of different areas, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. So next questions will go to Rasika. Still the same topic. Yeah. While we are trying to go back in our new normal. Yeah. But then the second wave coming. Yeah. What gonna happen? Are we gonna have to have the new after the second wave or something like that?
Well, I mean, can everyone hear me firstly?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So, I mean, the new normal is not one point in time, right? The normal is an evolving beast. And as I think all of the speakers today spoke about, the time frame for this to be resolved and for us to be in a state where we have a level of harmony and we're not all in crisis management mode is currently unknown. So the new normal could be, in terms of the longer term, it could be 12 to 18 months away. And I think we've heard that time and time again when we hear different people talk about the crisis. I think if we think about businesses and what they can do with respect to the second wave, I mean, I'll go back to the principles that I highlighted earlier. So if we don't already have it, ensuring that you have the appropriate crisis management plans in place, you have the appropriate mechanisms in place to actually support your teams and support your staff and employees. That's number one. And not just in terms of immediate support, but also if you've got workers who are infected and they're going to be returning back, put in place all the strategies that Natalie was talking about earlier. So how do you actually get them back to work in a safe and responsible way? At the same time, what you don't want to be doing is compromising how your business is actually running, right? So spending this time actually thinking about your crisis management strategies, as well as, again, if you haven't already done so, thinking about doing that ecosystem analysis for your business and really quickly assessing the tolerances that your business can actually work with in preparation for this second wave. And that tolerance, for instance, could be from a stocks and inventory perspective. There are a myriad of different business functions that need to be thought about when we think about preparing for the second wave. And so it's probably really hard to talk about that during this particular call, but you really effectively need to think about every aspect of your own business model.
Okay, thank you, Rasika. So there's another question. I think it's probably for Natalie. Yeah, since you're the expert on this, the question is from Fania Santoso. How to ensure or minimize the spread of virus through our product to our customer and even in our employee in the factory? Yeah.
So that's a great question. The first a client that we were working with actually related to anything COVID was a manufacturing company in China who was really worried about shipping their product outside of their country and people using it and getting infected. And at that point in time, when they were experiencing this issue, there really was nothing known about the viability of this specific virus and how long it persisted on surfaces. So we were able to answer their question with just kind of using data from previous coronaviruses, so looking at SARS and MERS and seeing how long they can last on surfaces. But since then, we've been able to learn a lot about this specific coronavirus. And we really don't have any reason to believe that it lives much longer than 2 to 3 days on any surface. And that's really, most of the literature that has looked at whether or not you can detect the virus on surfaces is really looking at viral DNA. So it's not, or viral RNA. So it's not looking at actually, is it viable to actually infect somebody? It's really just detectable. So, the World Health Organization, several different Centers for Disease Control have come out and said that they really haven't found a lot of documented spread from people touching things and giving it to other people. It really is close contact and droplet transmission from coughing, sneezing, things like that. But the best evidence we have is that it can persist on surfaces for around 2 to 3 days on average, depending on what the surface is. So just being cognizant of that and making sure that if you're producing something and shipping it to people and giving it to people, if you have a time lag that is beyond that, then you're safe. You don't really have to worry about that. But in terms of staff, it really depends on the situation. Trying to find ways that you can incorporate social distancing into your production, having employees wear proper PPE and masks is really important, but it varies from business to business.
Yeah, but again, PPE is also will containing the virus itself. Sometimes I'm thinking if I'm going to the grocery store, whether should I wear those hand cover or should I not? Because the virus is over there and not going to touch everything else. I'm going to be the one who's going to spreading out, right?
Yeah.
But it's not easy. I know. That's why every time I purchase anything, I will gonna open it 3 days after that. Just like you said, it's gonna be there like 3-4 days. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Then the next question is going to be to Rasika again. Yeah. It's from Indradi Halim. The question to Rasika: in relation to recovery business strategic, how effective the interventions of government to handle the economic slowdown event that becomes a global crisis economic, which impacted by the COVID-19.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. Look, I'm going to try to stay as apolitical as possible in my answer, but I will say a couple of things. In Cardno, we employ an approach called systems thinking, right? And systems thinking effectively looks at the different actors and entities within a system, how they interact with each other and how they influence each other, as well as the root cause of the issues that we see within a system. Okay, so that can be at the country level, or it can be at the village level, or it can be at the company level. Now, the system doesn't run when you don't have people. When you don't have people who are healthy, functioning, and able, right? And when you don't have people who are happy. And so I think, what we need to be doing, and within the Indonesian context and within the global context, is consistently applying the measures that Natalie was talking about in her presentation. It might be a little bit difficult in the immediate term or the short term from an economic standpoint, but if we have a slow bleed as opposed to ripping the Band-Aid off, that might exacerbate the situation even further. So as I understand it, I think there are some some directives that have been given in the Greater Jakarta area, as well as a number of cities and regencies in Java. But as I understand it, there isn't necessarily a consistent application of these across different areas of local government, for instance, right? So consistency of application would be something that should be thought about. The other thing also, and again, the political, economic and social context is very different, in each country and jurisdiction that we work in. And so, whether it's thinking about the sorts of stimuli that's required and safeguards and social safeguards that's required to actually dampen the economic slowdown, for instance, should be thought about from a policy perspective. And it's also, how quickly and effectively and rationally can all these changes be brought in and brought through through the administrative, legislative environment. And we're working. For instance, I'm in Australia in a state called Victoria, and we're in a state of emergency at the moment, and we have been for the last 4 to 5 weeks. But again, the Indonesian context is very, very different. And the socio-political challenges that you're working with are also different. Population density is different, right? Yeah. My next door neighbor is 50 meters away from me. Is that the same in Jakarta? Probably not. No. Right? Yeah. My home country in India, everyone's in each other's faces. So the scale of the problem that you're looking at is very, very different. So, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. It's a good answer. It's coming to my mind, to make this succeed, probably the next question to Pak Charles then. To make this succeed, does it necessary to have like a business continuity management, probably for the second wave, because we already, during the first wave is already coming, kind of coordinations between companies, local government, and probably to the central government, to prepare, because like Rasika said, if you do it by yourself, if it's small, it's not going to be affecting too much. Do you think will be required to have such like a huge PCM umbrella? So when it might happen in the second wave, every companies have already strategic, structured, systematic ways to handle it. What do you think about Charles?
Pak Fajar. Of course, first of all, we cannot become a resilient company without being supported by a resilient system or resilient environment. Whenever the surrounding system and environment collapse, then no matter how good your company is in building the organizational resilience, your company may also will be taken down. So yes, I totally agree with you, Pak. We need to communicate with other parties, relevant parties. If, for instance, if you don't know, still I'm not so sure what to do to prepare the second wave, what kind of containment measurement we need to put in place, we can consult with the Ministry of Health. They open a hotline to answer those kinds of questions. We can also having kind of practice sharing or discussions with our peer using the association pipeline or industrial or professional associations pipeline. So we can learn from each other. There's no such thing that we can do this alone. So yes, but I don't think that we need to build such a big or huge or comprehensive, expensive business continuity management. Right now, we only need to focus on how to help the organization surviving the disruption period during the pandemic. We can well, if I may say, we can worry about the other thing later that may become disruptions. But right now, we need to make sure that we can stop or first reduce the virus spreading. Because if the curve is still higher, cannot be flattening like Natalie says, then the disruption period will be longer and longer, and also the interruption for our business will take longer and longer. So that's my question, Pat.
Okay, thank you. So there is still so many questions. I have to run them. I'm just can read probably one or two other questions. Yes, since we already have 5 minutes left. The next question is from Brian Kraft for Rasika. You mentioned cost of risks needs to be factored into products or services. Who should carry this cost? If businesses, how will safer, more careful companies compete with opportunistic entities willing to operate with higher risk profiles in their supply chains? Should governments be regulating supply chains risk management?
Sure, that's a very complicated question, but I'll try to break this down into parts. So the first part was around the cost of risk management and who should carry this cost. I mean, look, if we think about it, the actual risk and the implications of it when a risk eventuates is definitely on the company. It's also broadly on the economy as well, right? So I guess what I'm trying to get at is you need the right sort of policies in terms of the baseline infrastructure and systems in place, and that's a question for the government. I guess in terms of carrying the cost of the risk from a business standpoint, let's ask ourselves the question: who carries the risk for climate change risks? Right? Businesses are increasingly starting to factor it into their operating costs and the capital infrastructure that they build as well. Right. So in terms of the factor, it will be applied across a stream of different businesses. I think the second part of the question was in terms of the companies that are more careful and how do they compete with opportunistic entities that are willing to work in a higher risk environment, right, with higher risk profiles in their supply chains. I think I'd go back and look at how we think about this, right? I'm not sure if having exposure to this sort of risk is even a consideration, because we've effectively seen a standstill in several industries around the globe, right? Or at least a huge dampening of activity. And so I'm not necessarily sure whether the question we ask ourselves here is about the companies that are more risk averse versus that are higher risk, that are more risk seeking or risk tolerant, because I think not factoring in BCP considerations, not factoring in business resilience and supply chain considerations, not factoring in the right sort of processes and systems to support your employees, it is just going to come back and bite the business. And I think it's actually saying, go back and evaluate your enterprise risk management framework and make sure you've got the right factors actually built into it. And then the last part of the question was around regulating supply risk management. Again, I'm not necessarily sure whether it's regulating the risk management element from a supply perspective, but I'll give you an example. In Australia, we have had some recent legislation looking at human rights considerations and modern slavery or slavery considerations in supply chains, right? Because the Australian government, along with the US government and the UK government and the French and a few others, have recognized that this social risk is actually having an impact economically and socially as well. And so I think the government has a very important role to play in providing the right policy environment and mandating compliance requirements that companies need to adhere to protect themselves, as well as the gross national product and the GDP. Because I think, as utopian as it may sound, I think it is for the greater good, and so I think it needs to be thought about. I'm going to pause there.
Okay. Thank you, Rasika. But I'm emphasizing your answer to take a look at your risk management again. Yeah, because these days, leaders are being challenged with probably the most difficult situations that they've ever faced before. Yeah. And they need to handle these situations, and they also try to depend on the risk management. Yeah, and it seems like more question from the leaders also. Yeah, that there's, well, quote, like there's nothing risk management can do about it, about the business these days. Yeah. So the question is to three of you. Yeah, how to answer the challenge, probably from the leaders, the challenge for the leaders themselves, yeah, about these situations, to handle these situations. Yeah, this coming from Rasika's statement. Take a look at your risk management again. How far is good enough, or I don't know. Please feel free. Any three of you, if you want to answer. Rasika, I hit you already, like.
Yeah, look, I've got a lot to say. Can you tell? Okay, so look, I think the question was around leadership and risk management. If I understood correctly, Fajar?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, I think leadership and mindset is the fundamental basis for success, right? Whether it's at the business level or at the governance level. At Cardno, we're very passionate about a sustainable way of talking and thinking about the world. And I'm not just talking about environmental sustainability. I'm not just talking about social risk mitigation, but true business sustainability. And that comes with a couple of different factors, I think. The first is risk management. And I think there's definitely a difference between having a high-level enterprise risk management framework and, updating your risk registers on a monthly basis, to having risk understood and mainstreamed across different organizational functions and using risk as a lever for sound operational performance, as well as from a competitive advantage perspective. The second thing that I'd say is that leaders need to be thinking about and doing is having a futures and foresight lens. I talked about this briefly during my presentation. We live in a complex system. We live in an environment which has got many unknowns. In Australia, we had bushfires 2 months before COVID hit, right? That's just an example here. I know that there's many different social considerations and potentially civilian movements that are happening in Indonesia at the moment. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about a complex dynamic system that's constantly shifting, and so we need to be thinking about the potential futures that we could be facing as business leaders, and having response teams in-house that can plan for these future business scenarios and act immediately, depending on the one that's eventuating at a particular point in time. I think the third thing that I would say is you really need to continue to listen to your customers. the customer is king. It's always been the king. And so I think there were a couple of other questions that came up in terms of how can we prepare for wave 2? How can we prepare for recovery? And you really need to be understanding the voice of the customer, what they're saying, and figuring out how you can react and work with them and co-create with them, given the broader political economic context in which you operate. So I'm just going to pause there and hand it over to my fellow panelists to respond.
Yes, please. Charles?
Yeah, so I think answering to that questions, but but we need to understand that risk management usually functioning before the event. So before the COVID-19 pandemic, if a leader says that now the risk management failed to see it coming, then well, we can learn from that. Okay, I cannot say that this is whose fault about this. But once we are in the event or during this pandemic, I believe that there's not so much thing that the risk management can do. This is the time for the BCM during the disastrous event like this. This is the time for the BCM. Before the event, the risk management can, yes, sure, ask the BCM person or unit to make the preparations. For instance, like preparations we can do for the second wave. But once it happens, then there should be a BCP being executed, the emergency response, whenever it's necessary. And of course, the risk management can also help the leaders to have a better preparations in facing situations after the pandemic. We can start, as Rasika says earlier, that we can try to understand what is the impact to our customer, but not only the customer, but also to our employees, to our partners, our stakeholders. Try to understand what is the impact to them and what the company can do. And of course, risk management can also help the leaders to revisit and evaluate the business strategy, and also assess the financial conditions like liquidity. Is there any liquidity issue that we are going to face in the next near future? So I think we can learn from this COVID-19 pandemic, but if you ask me what risk management practitioners can do to help the leaders right now, actually there's a lot thing that the risk manager can do for sure.
Okay. Thank you, Bachara. So I see Natalie. I know that she's past midnight over there.
I am.
You try to keep your eyes open, but it's going to be the last and I'm going to give it to you since you are the expert on this particular area. Yeah. When I know it's, I've read about this in papers. Everyone knows about. Probably have read this or heard this in the news. But when do you think this pandemic going to be over? Since we have the expert in here, this is going to be the last question.
First, I think that anybody who would try and tell you right now that they know when this is going to be over is lying. They don't know. No one knows right now, unfortunately. I think to get to a point where it feels like we're getting closer to back to normal and we feel like we're over this, we need to have good treatments in place and some way to prevent spread and transmission among our population. So I don't know how we get back to normal in the absence of a vaccine, which is a long time off. So we're looking at best, a year to a year and a half there, until something like that is ready to go. So we're going to have to be adapting for quite some time, and just adapting to a new normal for quite some time, unfortunately, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pak Charles. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Rasika. It's been a great to talk to you, to three of you this morning. Yeah, we've got lots of new enlightenment. Yeah, this morning in Jakarta and late midnight over there in US. Yeah, but I'm sure there are lots of questions here for the audience. I also thank you for all of those audience in here. We apologize if there is any mistakes or probably technical failures that you probably experience because, well, this technology is also new to all of us. Yeah, to have this kind of conversations. Yeah, if you can see me, I'm also sometimes like nervous talking to myself. I don't know whether you're listening or not over there. Yeah, but yes, it works. Yeah, it's amazing to be able to have conference within like I've seen in here like 8 countries altogether. Yeah, all together. Yeah, and the speakers from Australia, America, and Indonesia in here. Yeah. So after all, I have to thank you to everyone who contribute to make this enable. And I also thank you for our panelists, the opening speech from Antonius Alijoyo. Of course, probably some of you cannot see him here, but he was here today. And I must announce there's supposed to be there's the next event. Yeah, let's see. Next event is coming, and I believe you will receive the informations either in your screen right now or in your emails. Yeah, and we also request for your feedbacks. Yeah, the feedbacks will be popping up on your screen. Yeah, after this, and I think it's been an incredible webinar. I think we are going to see you all again in a probably similar topic or new topics. Yeah, because probably in the second wave. Yeah, I don't know, because it's very interesting. And once again, I have to close it from here. And thank you all. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.